Hi there, my name's Ben and welcome to my channel. And in this video, and in many others like that, I want to give you some really practical GM prep advice. Because prep is one of these things that if you let it, it can consume time, but it doesn't need to. If like anything else in life, you just plan ahead a little bit. Now, my bread and butter for being a GM, and I think for many others as well, is random tables. Building your own set of random tables so your players can interact with things within the game and it doesn't slow down or doesn't make you come up with stuff off the top of the head which is less interesting or less exciting than it should be. Because if you think about it, your job as a GM is to kind of control the chaos. You don't want so much chaos that everything goes completely out of control and the storyline's derailed and it just becomes an exercise in absurdity. Don't mind the cat. But at the same time, we want to inject just enough chaos in there that we can't predict entirely what's going to happen. Part of the joy of roleplay games is the unknown. And I'll give you an example of one of my players. No matter how many times I set something up and thought, no, I've boxed him in here, he would always think up some way, some third way out of a problem. That's excellent. It made me think on my feet, come up with new ideas. And you also have the player who inevitably derails the entire campaign and you have to think up new things on the go. It's good, it makes you think. But anyway, random tables. Control the uncertainty in your game to a point, but create just enough uncertainty that it's still fun. So what I'm going to do, I am going to make a D20 Loot That Body table. So if you think about it, we want certain random tables in our games. And the more often you use them, the larger that table should be. So let's say I'm going to create a dungeon and there's going to be multiple monsters in there. So we could then create maybe a D20 table because we're going to spend maybe 2 or 3 sessions in that dungeon going through it and killing the stuff inside of there. But if we want to set up a table for, let's say, an entire campaign, then maybe something like a D100 table or a D66 table makes more sense in the long run. So just depends. The more interact with it, the larger the table should be. If we've got a single, let's say a single object that the party needs to interact with that has various outcomes, maybe it could only be like a D4 or a D6. Okay. Let's jump to first person mode and we'll get writing. We're going to do a D20 Loot That Body table. D20 Loot That Body. And we're going to say they've gone into like a goblin encampment or a goblin cave, so it's just going to be goblins. I love goblins because they're just pure agents of chaos. I prefer more like malevolent goblins that have no sense of decorum and are pure agents of chaos. That's my type of goblin. So they're going to have ridiculous things on them. Okay, so first thing, when we're doing this table, the standard way that I guess most people, and this is what I used to do, you just start writing down 20 ideas, and usually you can do it. But I tend to find after about 8 or 9 ideas, you suddenly get bogged down and you're really struggling to fill out the rest of the table. So this is what I do. And this is something I learned from my time as teaching, is the concept of something called cognitive capacity. And cognitive capacity basically tells us that there is only so many ideas that we can fit into our head, or so many instructions we can fit into our head at any one time. So, and the way you get around that is breaking things down into smaller chunks or chunking that information out. So if you come from school recently and you've noticed that your teacher's putting everything in large text over multiple slides, that's why you break it down in smaller chunks. So what we're going to actually do, instead of writing down 20 ideas, we're going to break it down into subsections. Each subsection is going to have a theme, and that theme means that we only have to come up with a few ideas for each. So this is going to be typical goblin encampment, raiding local villages and farmers and that. So the first things that we could find in there off the dead bodies of the goblins is going to be tools. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. Next thing that we could find, perhaps, I don't know, yeah, like food and drink. because they've got to eat. Food and drink, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right, okay, stuff that's a bit more valuable. So, well, quite literally just valuables. So things like jewellery and the like. 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then how about stuff that's actually going to be more interesting to our party members? And this is apart from what the weapons the goblins are carrying, this is going to be other weapons. It's going to be 13, 14, 15, and 16. Because obviously goblins are going to favour things like knives and short bows and whatever. Okay, so for the last 4, I think we should break it down into 2 sections. So these are the things that are probably going to be much more valuable. Now, we can have consumables. So that's going to be things like healing potions and stuff like that, that we use once, it's gone, but it's really useful. So let's say 17 and 18, and then finally, artifacts. Now these don't actually have to be magical items, but they have to be something that's, genuinely worthwhile, that if we roll it, the party gets it. So that means on this table, if let's say we're going into a goblin cave, fighting multiple goblins over the course of maybe 1 or 2 sessions, and that means and we have quite a few combats, there's a chance that somebody's going to end up with one of these. Okay, let's start filling this out. Now, I promise I haven't thought about this in advance. So this is all off the top of my head. I'm trying not to edit this, to just give you an idea of what it's like in real time. Okay, number 1, tools. If we're attacking local villages and farms, I guess we'd have obviously village or farm equipment. So like a typical thing on a farm, it can't fit a plough into your pocket, but maybe you could have something like a sickle for cutting herbs and the like, which could also double as a knife. What about if we went to a village? Well, we could get the blacksmith's hammer. Not ideal for, fighting, but maybe you could in a pinch. From an inn, maybe we could have nicked a bunch of empty bottles. So you could either make musical instruments out of them by filling the water and blowing on the lids, or if you got a creative party member, they could come up with all kinds of empty bottles. And let's say we've got 1d6 of those. And then finally, what else can we get? A tailor. So maybe we get a tailor kit. Tailor's kit. So actually something quite useful out of that. Okay, food and drink, this should be easy. If they just got stew, the stew would go off, so something that would probably last, so maybe some sausages. I don't think that's how you spell sausages, but I am dyslexic, so we'll just assume that's how you spell it. And there's 1d4 rations worth of sausages there. Not going to last forever. So maybe we could have something like dried meat. It's like fancy dry cured jambon. So no, it's not how you spell dried. So dried cured ham. Oh, that would be banging. And let's say we got 1d6 rations in there, and that's going to last for ages. Okay, last 2. So drinks. From the inn, they're going to blatantly steal a keg of beer. Well, a keg of beer. So I imagine the majority of the goblins would have drunk that by now and would be very drunk. And then finally, other alcohol. So we're going to get a bottle of rum. So, in my experience of playing as a DM over many years, there are 2 types of players. The first is that their character gets the bottle of rum and they drink it at the first opportunity to get drunk. The second type of player realizes that they can make a Molotov cocktail out of that. Okay, valuables. So this is stuff that's actually worth money. They could have stole various jewelry. I think that's how you spell jewelry. And we're going to say that's probably worth... so it's going to be, let's say, 1d4 times 10 gold pieces. So, you know, just bits and bobs from here and there. How about, oh yeah, like a fancy fur-lined coat, or fur-lined cape. Very nice. So that's going to give you, let's say that's going to be 20 gold pieces. And maybe if you're feeling generous, you could give them a +1 bonus on save versus the weather. Because it's fur-lined, man. Okay, something else that's worth a lot of money. So a pouch, and it's going to be full of semi-precious gems. So gems, and we're going to say that we've got 1d6 gems and 1d6, and they're probably worth, let's say, 20 gold pieces each. Okay, so something finally quite valuable. Let's say a gold necklace. And we'll just say that's worth like 50 gold pieces. Banging, easy. Right, weapons. So our goblins typically want stuff that makes people bleed, but they might be carrying other things. So we could just give them a sword. Sword, you can decide what type of sword that is. So it's like, that's either going to be 1d6 or 1d8 damage. We could have a mace. It's 1d6. How about something weird like a whip? That's 1d4, but it's got a +1 range. And you can disarm people with it and stuff like that. And then finally, maybe something, like a crossbow. And that's usually like 1d6 if it's a light crossbow. Okay, right, starting to get into the really useful stuff. So consumables. Obviously, first one's going to be a healing potion. And that's going to heal you 1d6. So that's going to be useful if they're going to be fighting lots of stuff. Obviously, they're going to need it. Next consumable. So it's goblins. So chances are they're probably going to have something like poison on them. So it's going to be like, so it's a vial of poison. Vial of poison. And let's say that that's going to inflict an extra 1d6 damage. Obviously, you get save versus poison with that, but there you go. Vial of poison. And let's say it's got 1d4 doses in there. So we can use that up to 4 times. Right, finally, artifacts. Okay. +1. So weapon of GM choice. So +1 weapon of the GM's choice. Okay, and then finally, a rather cool artifact that we can think of that hopefully that our players are going to get their hands on. What would goblins either have stolen off people or would have in their possession anyway? So let's say we've got ourselves a ring. And if they'd stolen it off peasants, what would have affected peasants all the time? I know, plague. So a ring of plague away. Ring of plague away. And that just gives, when you're making a saving throw, so a saving throw versus disease. Is done at advantage. because everybody would need that back in those times when disease was rampant. Okay, so there you go. That's our D20 table, all sorted and done. It didn't take any time at all, really. But that gives you an idea of how to do it. As I said, whenever you're doing it, just break it down into smaller and smaller chunks. So if you were making like a D100 table, you could do like every 10 you break that down into a section, and then every 10 you maybe break it down into a further 2 or 3 sections. So you're really minimizing the amount of ideas that you have to come up with, because you're giving yourself very clear guidelines, very clear like categories to think about. And I promise you that will make your life much easier. All right, thank you very much, and take care. Bye.